Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how you are handling customer service might be killing your company. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is Cudby. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad you could join us. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. So my area of expertise is in really looking at the customer experience. And I do that through my company, Alignmint Growth Strategies. And the company's called Alignmint for two reasons. One is the magic is in aligning the company around how you want to address your customer experience and how you want to be for your customers. And then the mint is, it's spelled Alignmint, M-I-N-T, for a couple of reasons. One is when you plant mint, it grows like crazy. When you have something that's really awesome, it's in mint condition. And when you really nail a customer experience for retention and growth, you make money, so you make a mint. So that's sort of what we do, is focus on what is it that you need to do inside your company so that you improve retention and growth with your customers.
Excellent. Well, let's jump right into it. So, talk to me a little bit about what it means to align your customers, or sorry, your organization to a customer strategy.
Sure. So what often happens in companies is that the customer facing departments, and whether it's, customer service or customer success, they sort of get treated like a cost center, and they are being given a role where a lot of problems can roll downhill to them. So if the product doesn't work, the customer facing teams are dealing with it. Or if there's a misalignment between what sales promised and what was actually delivered, the customer teams are facing the customer facing teams are facing the unhappy customer. And so what we want to do is make sure that the messaging is aligned, that everybody is sort of playing from the same playbook, whether they're in marketing or sales or product or customer facing teams, or even, IT and billing. Because if you have a billing problem as a customer, then your customer facing teams have an unhappy customer. So how do you just make sure that everybody is getting on the same page? And that makes a huge difference in terms of the consistency in which you deliver a customer experience and the clarity with which your customer facing teams are able to communicate.
And so, let's talk about a playbook. Like, what's kind of the process of building it, and what do those things cover off on?
Yeah. So when I think about how to build a playbook, I start by thinking like, okay, which teams are involved in this particular play? So I look at the customer life cycle and I chunk it down into the key moments in time, and which I call key inflection points. And so maybe one of them is, the kickoff, and another might be onboarding and implementation, and another might be, renewals or whatever, business reviews. And think about like, okay, well, who's involved in all of these? And what is it that they need to do in order to be successful? And so, thinking about like, okay, what does sales need to do? What does customer service need to do? What does the product team need to do, or technical support need to do? What does billing need to do? And give everybody really clear roles so that they not only know what their activities are, but what data are they supposed to be capturing, so that we know that the tracking and metrics are going to work correctly on the back end. And it's just literally a follow the bouncing ball so that everybody has a clear path to success.
How do you diagnose when they're like, if things aren't working the way you expect them? How do you diagnose where those points of breakdown might be occurring?
Well, so generally speaking, the problem that the customer or that the company is dealing with is churn. And so if you are having a situation where your churn rates aren't where you want them, are higher than you want them to be, then that's the symptom that you want to cure. And in terms of where things are breaking down, it varies, but a lot of times what you find is when you talk to people inside the organization and you talk to customers, the problems bubble to the surface pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was reading a case study where basically an organization was, well, and I guess we hear about it often, right? That the sales team is selling something that can't actually be delivered, and then of course that's creating customer frustration, and that can spiral out of control and really can result in loss of market share. And so, what are your? I mean, is that something you see, and how do you help organizations kind of come to that realization and maybe actually bridge that gap?
Yeah. So there's a few things that I'll see on a pretty regular basis. One might be that sales is overpromising. That's definitely one of the ones that frustrates people. Another is that the actual onboarding process. And so I generally work with business to business and not so much business to consumer. And so a lot of times the product needs effort on the part of the customer in order to get it up and running. And
Right.
so if that onboarding process isn't clean, or if the training makes the customer like kind of drink from a fire hose and they never get, they never get proficient. So they get the training, but they don't really ultimately get implemented, and they don't ever get that level of adoption, then, then when it comes time to renew, the people inside the company are going to say, well, are we using this or not? Is this worth our money or not? And then the third thing that I'll see is, product can be challenging. So the product may not work as promised, or the product may not be as sophisticated as the purchaser hoped. And that's one version of the problem. And then another version of the problem is, product makes an update and they push go, they release it without even doing the internal steps. And so all of a sudden, customers are going to do that same thing that they've done 9,000 times before, and the product works differently, or it looks different, or they're looking for the red button and there's no more red button. And so then they call the company frustrated. And sometimes not only do they not let the customers know, they don't even let their internal customer success or customer support teams know. And then it just makes everyone look terrible.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that kind of like breakdown, and maybe, what are some strategies to stop that? Because, there's been many times where, I mean, this might be more business to consumer, but it could happen business to business, where I've used the software and something's not working, whether it be Apple or whatever, and you let them know, and you just wonder if it's falling into this massive abyss. And so how do you, like, what are some ways, like, because obviously you can get a lot of feedback, and that can be overwhelming for an organization. So how do you, one, get the feedback and then organize it in a way that's meaningful?
Well, the first thing you have to do is actually prioritize listening. And, companies don't always do that part. And, so they'll give sort of a really not particularly robust way to send feedback. And then they don't do anything to acknowledge that they received the feedback. They don't follow up in any way, shape, or form. And all that does is make the customer feel unheard. The bottom line is that you want people to feel seen, heard, and valued. And that is really the foundation of the work that I do, is both internally and at the customer. How do you make people feel like they're being valued in the relationship? Because that is how you build long-term relationships that are, very valuable in every sense of the word. And so I actually just had a situation this morning where I got an automatic renewal for something that I didn't really care about anymore. And they upped the charge. So I'd been on a promotional charge, and I was just irritated by it. And then I couldn't cancel. I couldn't renegotiate or cancel online. I had to actually call them.
Oh,
And
that's worse.
I was like, seriously, in this day and age? And it was a digital subscription. So I had to call a human to cancel a digital subscription. It was like mind-boggling. And then I, of course, had to wait on hold. And then I didn't get an email to confirm my cancellation. And they had policies that were in any way, shape, or form customer friendly, if I had felt valued in any way, shape, or form, they probably could have saved me, because I was mostly irritated that my price went up without a reminder. And I probably would have stayed longer if they had just, extended a lower price to me. But by the time I actually got a human, I was so irritated that I just didn't want to hear any of their offers. I just was like, nope, just cancel me. I'm not interested. I'm done. And by the way, I will not go back to this company. And to some extent, like, I will miss out on some of their services, and I don't care because I'm just done.
Yeah, I've found that with airline travel, like, I'm on the top of the list, right, of the tiers, or reward customer tiers, and they keep changing the program, trying to make it harder for people to stay there. And every time I go and I send something, you know at least they do one thing, is they actually reply, and somebody actually takes the time to send something. But it always makes me feel not valued, because I always feel like, they're trying to make it so I can't stay in my status any longer. So it's really frustrating. I figure that's probably a hard balance, though, when you're trying to do something that's right for the organization overall, but at the detriment of some of the people, some of the client base.
Yeah, there are certain industries where for sure the customer's satisfaction is not in the company's best interest. And I sort of think about insurance, especially medical insurance, where there's just not a lot of incentive to be particularly customer friendly these days, or it sure doesn't feel like it as a consumer of medical insurance. That feels like all of their incentives are to deny you and make it difficult. But for airlines, there are real benefits to that loyalty, and there are real benefits to having the longevity with people, and having customers that want to go out of their way to stay with you or fly with you, or whatever. So in travel in general. And
that's what I try to tell them too. I'm like, you are not a hub. Like, I live in two places, and they aren't a hub in either of the places that I live. And so I do go out of my way to travel with them, and they're not hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, and conversely, so I mean, I'll name, like, I'm a Delta, I'm a Delta loyalist, right? And so, but that may be the one that you're talking about too, because they just changed their whole system. And you're right, like, now it's all based on dollars instead of all of the different ways that you used to be able to gain loyalty. And I don't know if I'm going to travel enough in every given year at that price point to maintain my loyalty. And I do appreciate having status with them. And I do get bumped up now on a more regular basis. And I really am sort of sitting there and weighing my options. And I actually just started looking into flights for a trip that I'm taking this summer, and Delta doesn't fly there. And I'm like, oh, those are dollars that I could have applied to a Delta, toward my Delta tier. And now I'm going to have to send them to another airline.
Yep. And that's exactly, like, so for me, it's, I fly to Australia a lot, and Delta flies to Sydney. So I have to go from Denver, which is not a hub, to LA, which I would have had to do anywhere, because, nobody flies to Australia from Denver. But LA, rather than going to Brisbane, which is much closer to where I live, I have to go to Brisbane, or go to Sydney, and then take another flight to where I live. And that's a lot of trips and a lot of legs, and I have to do that 4 times a year for work. Yeah, I could go fly Qantas. I could go fly a lot of other airlines. And yeah, so every time they take something away, I'm like, I'm that much closer to go getting a status match.
Yeah.
Because it means a lot to be at the top of the status. So yeah, it just disappoints me when, and as a business person who's constantly evaluating, these types of things, like, I do have a little empathy of trying to, like, not have too many people in the clubhouse, and not having people disappointed because they never get upgraded, because there are so many people who are a diamond, or, I know they're weighing these different trade-offs, but it's also, I don't know how much they evaluate that, like, I've been a diamond for something like 5 or 6 years, it's pretty significant to lose it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it for sure it's significant. But so I have a book called Keep Your Customers. And in the
mm,
book, I talk about loyalty a lot. And one of the things that I talk about is the breakdown of different tiers of loyalty.
mm,
And so you can have, like, not every customer is loyal, but amongst your loyal customers, those aren't all created equal either. So the three tiers that I talk about in the book are lazy loyalty, limited loyalty, and lucrative loyalty. And lazy loyalty is kind of your customer of convenience. So
mm.
you might go to a coffee shop because it's located in the lobby of your building, and you may go every single day for as many years as you work in that building. But as soon as you get a new job, you're never going to go back to that coffee shop again. So
Right.
it's good revenue, but that person isn't emotionally connected to you. They're just buying out of convenience. Limited loyalty is what you're talking about. And that's the level of loyalty where it's really going to work for you, but you need to be convinced. And at the point at which the synergistic relationship doesn't work anymore, then you're going to start shopping around. And so that's where you were, or that's where you are right now, is you're sort of looking at them and you're saying, all right, I was bought in, but now it's no longer a working relationship for me. And so my loyalty is just, it's limited. Like, I got to be convinced. And then that top tier of loyalty is the lucrative loyalty. And those are the people that are kind of ride or die for you. And
Mm,
they're going to go out of their way to not only buy from you, but they're probably going to be more deeply engaged with what it is that you do. And they're going to tell other people about what it is that you do. And they really feel like they have
mm.
this emotional connection to your company. And it's possible that at one point you were a lucrative
Oh,
loyal
for
to Delta.
sure. I mean, that's the reason I've gone out of my way to fly them.
Right.
And I would tweet about them every time something cool happened. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but a Porsche came and picked me up from my domestic flight and drove me to the international plane on the tarmac. Like, how cool is that? And then so I was always talking about things like that. But then, yeah, as soon as I felt like it wasn't reciprocal anymore, like, hey, I go out of my way for you to fly, and now you don't care anymore. It feels like.
Right. Well, so the bad news is that, for Delta, you have downgraded your level of loyalty. And
Mm,
but the good news is, for other companies, when you understand these tiers of loyalty and you understand your customers, you can upgrade people. And so you can move them through the tiers of loyalty. And the challenge is really understanding which customers fall into which buckets, because a lazy loyal customer can be a really good source of revenue. And so they may look like they're behaving like a
mm,
lucrative loyal,
mhm,
but if you start thinking about, okay, well, what products extensions are going to appeal to them, or what marketing message is going to appeal to them, then you can actually take yourself in the wrong direction, because they're not buying for your product extensions or your marketing messages. They're buying because your coffee shop is in the darn lobby of their building, right?
right.
So understanding which customers fall into which categories and how to tease them apart is really important.
Mm. So let's talk about a little bit about maintaining a consistent customer experience, because I'm sure, I mean, you get to a company large enough, and I'm sure we've experienced where you call for help or whatever, and you get wildly different support. So, what are your thoughts around getting that consistent?
Well, that is the value of having these playbooks. And so
Mm,
it's not just about what do you do, but it's really about how do you engage. And so different companies need sort of different levels of uh, completeness, or some will take it all the way to having scripts of how this all works. But this is where you sort of, as a company, say, this is the way we do things, and these are our standard operating procedures. So if you hire people and you don't give them those guidelines, you don't give them those boundaries, then you're relying on their good instincts, and their
mm,
good instincts may or may not be good, and they may or may not be in alignment with what you want them to be doing and saying and offering. So this is where having these thoughtful approaches to what the customer experience should look like, and, at each of these moments in time, and how do you want to guide your team to respond and engage with customers, not just to answer their questions, but to continually build loyalty and really think about it from a customer centric perspective. I was just talking to somebody, and they kept talking about, they were telling me what the problem was for them, meaning the company. And I said, okay, but what's the problem that the customer is feeling? Like, you're telling me that they're not engaged, they're not feeling loyal. Why? Are you giving them a solution, or are you giving them a problem? It sounds like you're giving them a homework assignment. And you're actually, that them buying your thing is giving them more trouble than if they had just stayed with the thing that they had before. And he was like, oh, ouch. Like, yeah. So go figure out what's going to move their needle. What's in it for them, and then start building your onboarding around how do you make their lives better. Not just the person who bought the thing, but the people who are using the thing inside that company.
How prescriptive do you think companies should get? And I want to, I guess, share an anecdote with that as well. I knew somebody who worked for a mobile phone company, and on the help desk, right, customer support, and there was a very prescriptive way of like, this is what you say to them, and you have to say these things. It was all about empathizing, like restating and empathizing. And if you ask me, that sounds pretty fake when I get those people. I'm like, I know exactly what you're doing. But anyway, so they had a very prescriptive step by step. And before they rolled it out, this person who was on the help desk like had amazing scores, right? Customers loved him. He always solved their problems. His call times were probably a little long because he, probably spent a little too much time with them, but everybody was very satisfied. And then he had to follow the script, which just didn't seem to work for him, to the point he's no longer with the company. And so I do wonder how prescriptive does a company should be? And then in an instance like this, does that mean that person's just not a good fit, or was it the company might have been overly prescriptive?
So that's really going to differ based on industry. And so if you have a company that is really call center driven, then it probably is really script driven and very prescriptive. I mostly work with companies where it's more of a customer success team, and that there's more variables going on, and it is more relationship driven. And so you can give, what I generally do is I provide like a template, and I'll say, here's how you want to customize it. So it's a different relationship based on the kind of company and also the kind of customer. So that person that you're talking about, maybe they needed to be working on the tier that was the higher end customers. And so there, it's more where there's more relationship and less of a fill in the blanks. And maybe that company didn't even offer that. And so, there's so many variables based on the company, but that's sort of the way I think about it.
And so do you look for, like, I guess then not attributes, themes that you want your customers to leave with then after an experience? Is that kind of one of the ways you look at it, or how do I want my customers to leave this interaction each time they work with my customer success team?
There's a little bit of that, and there's a little bit of sort of measuring customer satisfaction, and how much to ask is art and science, right? How often do you ask? Because I think we've probably all been over surveyed. And I think that there's an over reliance these days on that famous, like, net promoter score, the one question that says, like, on a scale of 1 to 10. And it can start to feel inauthentic at a certain point, especially if you don't get a sense that they're actually listening to you on the back end. So, it's not necessarily that, but it's really listening to what the customer is, how they're engaging, what are their challenges, are they using the product and services? And then there's also listening and watching for them to be successful. and finding those moments where you can recognize and celebrate their achievements. So, it's not quite as cut and paste as, how did they leave every single interaction. I think that again falls more into the realm of sort of call center engagement. And, again, we've all been there. Every single time you finish an interaction with a call center support person, you get a survey or you get a question or, how did we do? And,
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, there's clearly value in it to the company because they keep doing it. It's not as much where I play, because I think that it ends up feeling inauthentic.
I was thinking more like tying back to brand values or something like, when do you want what is the persona you're trying to portray? And maybe that's hard to do on an interaction by interaction basis in a business to business type relationship. But yeah, I was thinking back to that. But so the question I guess I'd have for you though now, is obviously when companies start to get a bad reputation, especially in their, like, we deal a lot with software companies. And so, if they start like poor releases or poor support, like when your system goes down and you're like, I need engagement, or poor knowledge of upgrades, and like what things could be beneficial to you if you upgraded, right? It just feels like a sales pitch maybe every time you call. Like all of these things put together, you start to get a reputation. How do you turn around a reputation before it's too late?
It really goes back to putting the customer, being more customer centric. And if you are in an organization that is constantly, pushing your own agenda, and the customers don't feel seen, heard, and valued, then you're right. It changes the dynamic of the conversation. So there's a really big difference between like, hey, I've got a new feature to tell you about, and hey, at the last quarterly business meeting, you were talking about the challenges that you were facing with X, Y, and Z. And, I think I might have a solution for you. Let me share how I think that we might be able to address your problem. Like those
Mm,
come across really differently. But in order to be able to have that second conversation, you have to have actually done the listening and reminded yourself and be thoughtful about the customer's needs instead of, hey, let me get this cool upsell. So it's a mindset difference, and it's also a company culture difference.
and how do you effectively scale that though then across your organization, like quickly enough, right? Like, because if you are starting to get a bad reputation, then that can be hard to stop the momentum there. So I imagine you have to do some radical changes pretty quick.
Yeah, but those reputation problems don't generally happen in a vacuum. Because if
Mm,
you've been doing the work and you've been thinking about how the customer engages, then even if you have a screw up, there's more tolerance for the problem. There's actually some really fascinating research out there that says that if you screw something up as a company and you resolve it in a way that is satisfactory to the customer, they become more loyal than if you had never had the screw up to begin with. And
mm,
so there's a real opportunity to own the relationship. But in order to get to that point, you have to have been acting like a company that cared about the relationship. So
mm,
those things aren't usually a one-time deal. And so you either work in a company that has a culture of valuing customers, or you don't work in a company that has a culture of valuing customers. And, if you work in a company that does not value, like fundamentally doesn't value the customers, and there are lots of them, then you are losing a ton of money because the cost of churn is so high.
yeah.
People think about growth and they think about, how do we get more people in the front end? How do we get more lead gen? How do we get more people to sign on the dotted line? And that front end is almost irrelevant if your back end is broken. And if
Mhm.
you're bringing new customers in, and every new customer that comes in the door is filling the seat of somebody who just churned out, then it's very, very hard to grow. If you start plugging those holes and you fix the churn problem, then not only is every new customer sort of net new revenue, they're not just filling the hole of somebody who left, they're actually net new, then that's growth. And the more you are growing those existing customers and up-leveling them inside of your organization and upselling them and cross-selling them, then that's really how you get the flywheel moving. So the death here is in the cost of churn.
So how do you, but like, imagine maybe a leader, like somebody came in as a CEO of a new company, right? And they've identified that this company isn't customer centric. Like, how do you start to change the culture? What are some of those key things? Is it get them through the motions first, right? Hey, do these steps, or is it like getting their hearts to change first?
So I think, you can't fix everything at once, but being really intentional about having a customer reset is a really great way to start. And so I actually am working with a company and came into that exact situation. Like they had not been nurturing their customers to the point that they wanted to. They had a real churn problem, and they had a lot of unhappy customers. And every conversation with the customer was unpleasant. And so they were also losing a lot of people in their customer facing teams, because who wants to deal with that? And so it was becoming this real negative vortex for the company. And the way that they started was by, like, I worked with them on a play that we called the customer reset play. And they talked to every single customer and said, like, we know that there have been issues, and we want to change the dynamic, and we want to listen. And those were not fun conversations. But it took that real intention of saying, we're going to change the course here. And I can tell you that in a year, the conversations are completely different now. The conversations are now focused on, how are we building the relationship? How are we growing the, amount of business that we're giving to the company? How are we using more of your features and benefits? And it's really almost none of those, well, not none, but much, much fewer of those fire drill conversations where it's just like a misery meeting every time. So, sometimes it is just planting your flag and saying, we're going to change from here.
Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation, Allie. I would love to hear what 3 things you want to leave top of mind with folks are.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is really thinking from a customer-centric perspective. How are you thinking about their value and how they feel seen, heard, and valued in the relationship? And thinking about that as the path to growth. And the second is, what are you doing inside your company? What are the plays that you're giving your team? What are the clear and consistent processes that you're giving your team, so that whenever they come up against a customer facing situation or a customer facing moment in the journey, they know what to do, and they have a really clear path to success, so that they can engage more confidently. And when they are more confident, it's going to help keep that relationship going on a path to growth. And then third thing is really thinking about that importance of retention and growth differently. Maybe rethinking whether or not your customer facing team is a cost center, and seeing them as an important part of the revenue journey. Because when you can make retention an easier path, and we can have those customer facing teams be the people who are leading to more retention, more cross sells, more upsells, then the longer that you can keep your customers, the more you can really grow revenue in the longer term.
Excellent. And so how can folks find out more about what you do or get in contact with you?
Yeah. So come to my website, which is alignmintforgrowth.com. And you can always find me there. My book, Keep Your Customers, is available wherever books are sold. And I would love for the listeners to come find me on LinkedIn. So come find me personally, Allie Cudby, or follow the company Alignmint. And when my request is that if you find me on LinkedIn, please just put a quick note in the comments that you heard me on a podcast so that I know to accept your request. I don't know about you, but I'm getting so many solicitations on LinkedIn these days. It's hard to know who's really asking to connect. So just please let me know.
I'm tempted. There's a guy I enjoy watching on LinkedIn who does I think his product is he helps you create videos, right? Like he interviews you or his team, right, for a couple hours, and then you've got social media content for months, right? And so he does a lot about like how do you properly engage on LinkedIn. I totally want to come up with a like standard response to all those people who connect with me just to sell me something. Like watch this guy, and then we can re-engage maybe after that.
Yeah. I'm
So
it's one
tired
of
of it.
the banes of my existence on LinkedIn. Cause sometimes like I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, somebody's connected with me and maybe they did hear me on a podcast. And then all of a
Mm.
sudden I accept the request and immediately get the
Yep.
sales pitch. So
Immediately. Not
immediately,
even.
like no subtlety whatsoever.
No, I'm so tired of it. But
Yeah.
anyway, thank you for all your time, Allie. I'm glad you could join our show today.
Thank you. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.